So, Mike, have you been watching the Bookworm YouTube channel in the last week?
No, I have not. I haven't been on YouTube at all in the past week, let alone publishing videos or watching videos that I really only create for the Bookworm channel. I'm sorry, I don't go back and
I
rewatch
don't
them.
either. I do not go back and rewatch them. That is for sure. But I know that other people would like to. That's why I'm bringing it up now, because it occurred to me. I think you and I talked about this 2 or 3 weeks ago. Maybe it was longer than that. About how we weren't getting the watch time on our videos that we probably should have. And I went back and looked and realized, oh, it's because they're all unlisted. Nobody can find them. That would do it. So I went through and I've been scheduling one to come out every day. So they've been publishing for about a week or so now. And like
Okay.
every single day, there's one of the old Bookworm episodes that's now coming up on YouTube. I've been doing some of this on my personal channel too, but there's a bunch of this that's now going out. So if you want to ever see us, I know sometimes people pop into the chat. It's like, that is not what I expected you guys to look like. Like every once in a while that happens. Like, so hi, but you can come see us record these. We don't ever really do any. I don't think we've ever done like screen sharing type stuff here, but if you ever wanted to see us, see the episode live, you can do that. Those recordings are there. It's also a good way if you ever want to listen to it from YouTube, you can do that too. There's also a special perk of hearing some of our banter before and after a podcast. Just saying.
It's true. Like finding out what the next book I'm going to pick is.
That's true. That will not be in the the final episode, but were you to watch this recording, you would know that answer.
It's true.
Inside baseball. That's what it is. Super fun. That said, should we do some follow-up? You have a lot. I have a little.
If we have to.
I was reading your list earlier before we started recording, and I was running through all the notes ahead of time. It's like, holy cow, he's got like some intense stuff here.
Yeah. And to be honest, I did not do any of it.
Oh,
Yeah.
bummer.
I am ashamed. You can leave it on here for next time. I still intend to do all these things. So I'm going to add these to the list for 155, and I will follow through with these. I'm assuming people aren't interested in hearing my excuses, so I won't make any.
Okay. I usually give excuses because it makes me feel better, but that's me.
It's been a busy couple of weeks for me, and I barely got this book done, which was shocking in and of itself because I have been looking forward to reading this one for so long. But life happened, and between soccer and church and day job, I haven't had a moment to breathe. So I did not action on these.
Okay.
Apologies.
That's totally valid. Well, I have two.
Should I share the ones I sucked at, or should I just hide them until next time?
Let's hide them. If you don't talk about it, it doesn't exist.
All right.
Well, I won't make that comment. We'll talk about that later. So I have two. One of these was to put together a portable routine. So basically, what are some things that I'm going to do throughout the day, but it doesn't have to happen at a certain time. Okay. I did do this, and I had limited success with it. What I found was that there are 2 or 3 items on this list that I tend to be pretty excited about doing. So then I do them pretty quick, and I tend to do them earlier on in the morning just because I want to make sure I do those that day, which is fine. But then there's 3 or so of those that are like, I should really do this every day, but I'm not super stoked about doing it. I know that I would be better off if I were to do it, but I don't really want to do it. And for whatever reason, you can probably make some pretty good guesses here. Those are the ones that get carried over day after day, and I don't accomplish. I don't really know what to do with that other than maybe do those first, but I don't want to do those first. I want to do the other ones first. So lame motivation. That's what that is. So limited success on that. I haven't really figured out what I'm doing with it. Maybe today's book will help with that a little bit. But my other action item, this one was more fascinating to me than I was expecting. And it was to do one generous act per day, basically choosing to give more in a specific scenario than I normally would have. And when I made that action item, my intent was to make that part of my day job. Like, let me take a request that was given to me. Somebody's got an issue with something. Let me help them out a little more and like offer help in scenarios when I normally wouldn't have. That was kind of my intention with that. I can tell you that save, I think, one day, I was able to do this every single day since we last recorded. What I found was it's very easy to do this. The ramifications of doing this are still weird to me because on one hand, it ends up meaning more work to me because people then like, oh, well, if I could do that, then they start exploring that thing, but then they need more help. So it ends up leading to more work in the long run. But then at the same time, people have a higher view of the work that I'm doing at the same time, it seems. So it's kind of this two-pronged thing. At the same time, I don't have that kind of time to do that much support stuff. And that's fine. It's just a weird thing that I've got to kind of work through at the moment. So I'm still doing this and we'll continue to try to do this. I just haven't quite figured out what all the trickle-down effects of this one are. If I'm honest and look at it holistically, these are all positives, but I wasn't expecting to need to put even more time into it because of that, if that makes sense. Like, that's kind of a weird dynamic that's going on there.
It does. That is basically how I got in the situation that I am in.
Oh, good job. Good to know.
We were chatting before we hit record that I am taking an accounting class. I'm digging into business financials in a way that I never have before because someone's got to do it. So I raised my hand, and that means a lot more time and effort to figure things out in addition to all the other stuff I got to do. So here we are.
Awesome. Have fun with accounting.
Be careful, I guess.
Anyway, so that's...
Don't be too nice.
It's kind of an interesting action item result. I haven't really had one kind of like that I can recall. So I don't know. We'll see. I'll keep up with it. See what it turns into.
Sure.
All right. That said, we should jump into today's book because this is either going to be fairly straightforward and we'll get through it, or this is going to take a very long time. It's going to be one of those two. It's not really going to be in between. And I think we both know that. Totally fair.
Yep.
So today's book
100%.
is The Great Mental Models. This is volume 2. This is the physics, chemistry, and biology segment of The Great Mental Models. And this is by Rhiannon, Beaubien. I'm sure I'm butchering that horribly. And Shane Parrish. I know Shane. This is from the Farnham Street team, but I don't know this name, Rhiannon. It doesn't ring any bells. I feel like I've not seen that one on any of the Farnham Street stuff, so I'm not sure what the connection is there.
This is the same co-author that was with the first volume.
And I know that...
But I have not familiar with the name other than that.
I know that on the third volume, that name is connected as well, but Shane is not. There's a third author that steps in on the volume 3. I don't know the story there at all. And there's not a... Like, in a lot of these books, there's like an author's piece, like at the back, like on the dust cover and such. There's usually like about the author. There's not that on this one. And I didn't go back and look at volume 1. I assume it's not there either. So I don't really have any history there. Could have looked it up, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. But if I were to take a stab at the name, I would say Rhiannon Beaubien.
Beaubien. It's not Beaubien? There's no I.
I don't know if that's right.
I don't know.
But anyways, let's stop butchering this name.
It's by the Farnham Street team. That I can pronounce. I can run with that. So this is about mental models, right? And this is coming at it from the sciences, effectively. And I know that whenever I picked this, I had asked you if we should pick it or not because I didn't know how deep into science land this was going to go. And I was not so sure we would be able to explain some of this in layman's terms. So I was asking you about it. You said it would be okay. So here we are. And we get to talk about great mental models once more.
All right. So blame me if it's too sciencey for you all.
Pretty much. And I know that there are many much chapters here that we're not going to cover because this is one of those books that's pretty dense, I would say. Just from an initial view of this, there's a lot in here. How many pages is it? Do you notice there's no
380 something?
380? I know that there's no appendix. Like there's no real, like usually when we get a book of this size, there's like almost a third or at least a quarter of the back of it is all like added extra materials that I usually don't go through. So I kind of assumed that when I picked it up, and then I started reading it and was like, wait, what's in the back? I was doing the whole how to read a book thing, was flipping through the back. I was like, wait a second. The conclusion is on like 3 pages from the end of the entire book. What?
Yep.
Okay.
It's true.
So very full book. The 3 sections are broken out in the physics, chemistry, and biology in that order. So
yeah, it's
those 3 sections, and I've picked out 2 or 3 within each of those for us to talk about today. So unless you want to add something to it, Mike, I'll mention the other ones, but we're going to cover 2 to 3 of each of those. And there are others. I'll read those off when we get to them. Anything else before we jump in?
We'll see. I don't know which of these other ones I would want to bring up. Maybe a couple where I have action items associated with them, but I think it kind of depends on how the conversation goes. So we will take it as it comes.
Yep. I want to start this with, so in the pre-introduction, let me get my book open here. There's a section actually before the table of contents, which is effectively talking about what mental models are from a very high level, short, condensed summary view. And I think that it helps a little bit to read. There's a little bit of a section here that I want to read to you, but I think it'll help set the stage if you're not familiar with the concept of mental models. So anyway, this is from the Farnham Street team, and they have a statement that they strongly believe that says the quality of your thinking depends on the models that are in your head. And then a little bit down below that, it says, when you learn to see the world as it is and not as you want it to be, everything changes. The solution to any problem becomes more apparent when you can view it through more than one lens. And that's effectively what they're getting at, is like these models are different ways to view things. So if you're struggling with understanding something that's going on, you can use these different models to basically color the situation that you're looking at to try to give you a different perspective on it. Is that fair?
Yeah, in the first book, they mentioned that mental models are the lattice work on which you hang your ideas, and it's basically the lens at which you look at the world. So by looking at your situation or your problem through different mental models, you can make sense of it in different ways. And some of the mental models from the first book, like Occam's razor, for example, if you're trying to decide between 2 different options, Occam's razor says that the simplest solution is the best solution. Oh, okay, well, looking through that mental model, then this solution is significantly simpler than the other one. That's the right one, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean that from every perspective, that's the right answer, or that is 100% correct that that's the right answer. It depends on your bias, basically. So that was the idea behind the first mental models, and I feel like it is actually more effective in the second one because of the domains that they are taking the ideas from, and they're basically making them more generalizable. So they'll take the ideas from the different categories in this particular book, and then they'll use some completely different genre as the basis for this is how you can see that this played out in another realm. And I feel like in terms of accomplishing the goal of helping people realize how to apply these mental models, this might be better than the first one.
Yeah, I would agree with that, which I was not expecting at all. I was really expecting it to kind of just build on the previous and be a little more explicit about how things could be applied, but pulling these sciences in and showing how it applies in areas completely outside the realm that you would think it should be covering, like thermodynamics. Well, how does that apply? In a lot of ways, actually. We're not going to talk about them today, but in a lot of ways. So there's just a lot of application outside of that. I just was kind of caught off guard by that. So I was very grateful for it, and I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and to kind of piggyback on this, Martin mentions in the chat that this one, he enjoyed rereading this one because when they read it the first time, they compared it to the first, and it's quite different. It is quite different, I think, because because of the models that they chose to use in the first one. There are significantly more models in this one, and they are things that you are kind of familiar with already. It doesn't read like new information. And that's why I made the comment that I did about this actually being maybe more applicable, because to the point that you just mentioned, Joe, like thermodynamics and all these types of things you heard about in your elementary school science class and you moved on because you didn't become a scientist.
Right.
Right. And you don't think about the second law of thermodynamics very often. But
No.
actually, there are ways that plays out in other in other domains. And so that is, I think, one of the cool things about this second volume. It has a lot more surprising application than you thought. But almost everyone that I've told about this series, the first volume, they're like, oh yeah, that's great. They picked that one up, no problem. And then they look at the contents for the second and the third ones, and they have the exact same reaction. They're like, I don't think this one's for me.
Right. Right.
And having read it, yes, it is for you. That's kind of the point. If you are, if you are only looking for scientific information or chemistry information, then this book isn't for you. But if you want to take these ideas that you know just a little bit about, maybe because you remember being taught this, but you've moved on from that because you don't see any sort of application for it, this is absolutely the book for you.
And just to kind of cement that idea, okay? If we jump into the introduction, there's a story in the introduction that I feel like explains this very well. And that's the story of the Fram, which is this boat that was built to work with nature instead of against it. I thought this was a fascinating story. I'm going to butcher all the names, so I'm not going to tell you all the names, but Norwegian scientist. This is was it early 1800s? It was right in front of me. Yeah, late 1800s. They had a lot of curiosity about what's going on at the North Pole, but every time they tried to send a ship there, they had this really odd coincidence in that they would try to get somewhere close, and then it took so long to get there that the water would freeze, crash, and smash the boats, and they couldn't get anywhere near it, right? So this scientist had the idea to develop a ship that worked with this instead of against it. Obviously, there's major crushing forces when it comes to freezing water, so that's what would destroy these boats. Instead of building a typical boat that had your normal keel and had a special shape underneath of it to glide with the water, he built one that was pretty much spherical, didn't really have much for a keel, and anything that would reach down into the water to propel it forward could be lifted and removed. What that meant was whenever it would get to the points where the water was freezing, it would have that crushing force, but because of the spherical nature of underneath of it, it would essentially pop the boat up out of the water and set it on top of the ice. And then it would thaw and it could come back down and then they could keep going. So it prevented the boat from being crushed. They collected a lot of information. They never actually got to the North Pole, it sounded like, but they were able to get somewhere close. All of this was done by using the mindset of how do I work with this instead of against it? Like, how do I try to force my way through it? Let me look at it from a different angle and see how I can make this work. That's the concept. That's basically the process of mental models that we're talking about. It's like choosing a different lens to look at a problem through.
Yep. That is a brilliant application of the approach for the rest of the book. You don't really expect that sort of thing in the introduction.
Right.
But
right.
That is the exact thing you're going to get for the next 397 pages.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, because this is before you ever get into the book. We haven't even started the book yet. So take that for what it is. So that said, the last thing before they get into the meat of the book, there's a quote here. The most important thing to remember is that all of these models are tools. So there is no, like, it's typical, right? Like, you don't treat everything like a nail to beat it with a hammer, because sometimes you don't need that tool. You need a different tool. So not every one of these is going to be applicable to every situation. So you got to pick the right one for the time.
And that is the dangerous part with reading the books that we read, I feel. Because you're referring to that famous saying that when all you have is a hammer,
Yep.
everything looks like a nail. And so you can get a mental model, you can get an idea or a framework from a single book, and you can be like, this is the tool, this is the solution. And you can just go to town trying to apply it to every area of your life. And it takes a lot of skill to figure out what are the right places to apply it and what are the wrong places. And this is the problem with systems books, especially when taken in isolation.
Yep. Yep.
Is just the term system, or that what we refer to as a systems book. It's basically saying, yes, this is your all-in-one multi-tool, your Swiss Army knife for productivity and to help you get to the next level in your life. But it's never that simple. Even that analogy, like there are no multi-tools here. There's just the individual tools. And so you have to learn through trial and error, probably, when to use certain things. And if I were to summarize, like the biggest lesson I've learned through 154 episodes of Bookworm,
Jeez.
it is that exact thing, that there's going to be something in each book that we read that has the potential to benefit my life. But at no point is there going to be a book that is just like, this is everything. Now just do this. I guess from our Christian standpoint, you could say the Bible would be that book, but even that is like a collection of books, and you have to learn the context in order to apply those things. It's the exact same thing with all of these books that we read. You have to figure out when and where to use this stuff. So that means that we should all be on the same quest here to collect more mental models, to collect more dots and allow us to connect them in new and interesting ways. And never be satisfied with, well, I've got a couple of them now, so I'm good.
Right. Yeah, let's just jump into them, because there's a lot of different ways that you can come at these. But the first section here is on physics, and the very first chapter inside of this is about relativity, and the theory of relativity. There's a lot of different ways that we could maybe discuss that, but I'm not gonna. That's one thing I don't want to do, is spend a lot of time just talking about the science part of this, because it can get to be a bit much on that, but you can get the kind of gist of it. Basically, things are different depending from the viewpoint that you see them. And that's one of the main points here, is that your perspective informs your experience. Like, that's one of the quotes in the book. A good example of this is one of the initial kind of science parts, I guess, is this concept of Bob and Alice on the train with two lightning strikes. So Bob is outside the train watching the train. Alice is on the train, and the very front of the train and the very back of the train get hit by a bolt of lightning, two different bolts of lightning at the same time. Okay? Bob is watching from the outside. He's talking to Alice afterwards and says, wow, wasn't that crazy that the train got hit in two places at the same time? Alice says, what are you talking about? The front of the train got hit first, and then the back of it got hit. Well, technically, who's correct? Well, depending on which perspective you're coming from, they're both correct, because Bob saw the front and the back hit at the same time, but because the train is moving and the speed of light working the way it does, the bolt of lightning that hits at the back has further to travel than the one that hit in the front, because she's moving towards the one in the front, which means that she sees the one in the front strike first, and then the one at the back strikes. So from her perspective, she is correct, because scientifically, that's what she saw. She's not wrong, but that's her perspective, right? So you have to be a little careful when you're perceiving things, because you don't know what laws of nature are sometimes at play and affecting your viewpoint.
Yeah, so you did a fine job retelling that story, but I'm just as confused hearing you tell it as when I read it in the book.
Really?
There's the better version of the story from this chapter. To me, the one that made sense to me was that you are traveling on a ship. Okay, so you are moving in a direction, plane, car, whatever. You're in a vehicle that is moving, and on the vehicle, you're holding a ball, and you drop the ball, and it goes straight down to the floor. So from your perspective, the ball falls straight down. But if you were to remove the vehicle that you were traveling in, and someone who is removed from the situation sees you moving, but there's like this transparent barrier now, so that, and they see the point at which you drop the ball and then the point at where the ball ends up, it's obvious that the ball is moving forward as you drop it, but because of your perspective, you're seeing it drop straight down. And all of that is to say that everyone bases their beliefs on their perspective, and no one understands 100% what is going on because you can't see all the different perspectives at the same time.
Right.
So I don't have an action item from this chapter, but it did challenge me. Basically, what you see is never all there is. And the skill to develop here is to get good at perspective taking, which is the ability to perceive a situation from an alternate point of view. That's something I want to improve. I want to be able to see things from other people's point of view, which step one is just assuming that people are not lying to you if they tell you something that doesn't make sense.
Right.
And that sounds ridiculous to explain it that way, but I've noticed lately I've been getting annoyed with people that I see falling into this. It's like, well, it's not my experience. Like, I don't care if it's your experience. You might be wrong.
Yes. Yes.
About many things. I am. Can't we just all agree that we don't know everything? Like, I don't know why that's so hard.
Well, I have to admit that I'm wrong in that case. I even do this. So, like, what you were just saying, like taking somebody else's perspective, like viewing a situation relative to someone else's perspective. Simple things like I'm impatient when I'm driving. Like this is no secret to my family. It's like if I'm behind somebody and they're moving slow, I'm sometimes physically irritated. Like it drives me up a wall. When the speed limit's 60, you're doing 55 because I know this road feels like it should be 55, but it's actually 60, which means it's okay to do 67. Like that's Joe's way of driving. And I will pull up behind somebody. They're going 55. It drives me nuts. And I will get upset. But then I've noticed that my kids sometimes are like, oh, they're going so slow. It's like, okay, take a deep breath. We don't know what's going on in that car. Maybe they have a pot of chili in the back that they're taking to somebody who's sick and they can't go that fast because they may spill it. Like, you don't know the answers to these things. Like, I have to try to view it from...
assume that next time I'm behind somebody slow, they are bringing someone sick a pot of chili.
Yes, exactly. That's what it is. Every time. If they're going slow, they have a pot of chili in the back and they can't spill it. Like, that's like my go-to response on that one because I've done that before. I've had pot of chili in the back to take it somewhere. And if you take hard corners or you have to react quickly, guess what? It ends up on the floor. I don't want to do that.
Spill the chili.
Yep. It's or here. So another example, I had a surgery and I was told I wasn't allowed to lift more than, I want to say it was 10 pounds at the time for a couple weeks, and which was not fun. Anyway, we had little baby kids at the time, which meant that when we would put kids in and out of the car, I shouldn't be lifting them. But there were a couple times when we would get to the car to do that, I would be pushing the stroller to the car and then would ask my wife to pick up the kid to put them in the car, and I would go around and get in the car and sit. It's like, okay, what kind of dad am I? I'm not even going to put my kid in the car. That's what it looks like from the outside. Like, don't be that guy. Like, don't be the one that makes your wife do all the things. Like, that was the view that it came across. But I wanted to explain to everybody who was watching, like, no, I just had surgery. I'm not allowed to do that. Like, but whenever I see other people do things like that, I try to remember those situations because then I'm less likely to be like, don't be like that. Don't be like that person. Well, you don't know the full story. You don't know their perspective.
And that's the thing. You'll never know the whole story. So that is like a fairly innocuous example. Like, they don't know your situation.
Right.
So you can't do things a certain way because of this thing that is true. You just had surgery. Right. But I think we can explode this to a much higher level. I'm not talking about relativity in terms of relative truth, just assuming that my perspective is not all that there is to be gained on the topic of what is true. So it's not necessarily thinking that you're wrong all the time. There's that saying, strong convictions lightly held, like being willing to change your mind as you get new information, but also not just like rejecting all the information that comes to you because it doesn't fall in line with your worldview or your bubble of belief, going back to Liminal Thinking by Dave Gray. See, I love how all this stuff ties together.
It
If you
fits
were just to
together.
read, yeah, I mean, I forget when we read Liminal Thinking. It might have been after the first round of the Great Mental Models, but I
think
can
it was.
totally see how reading that book influenced my approach to this one.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it is fascinating. I wish we had ways to do like I don't even know how this would happen, but a way to do like a book review that's topical, and then you're syntopical, I guess to use the word, and then you're reviewing actually like 6 or 7 books at the same time. The problem is trying to nail down which 6 or 7 because it branches out into so many different fingers that you'd have a hard time nailing down what those are.
Well, if we're going to embrace a mental model known as the map is not the territory, you could say, Joe, that you could make a map of this. What would you say? Content, maybe?
Interesting terminology. I decline to use said terminology.
Okay, that's fair.
All right, so that's the relativity piece of physics. There's a couple more here we're going to skip, unless there's something you want to cover in here, Mike. But one is reciprocity. Basically, it's the concept of I scratch your back, you scratch mine. That theory of thinking. The other one is thermodynamics, and they do go through the 4 laws. I just had a brain.
4 laws.
4 laws
Yeah,
of thermodynamics.
so I can jump in here real quick with reciprocity. I think the big thing that I got from this section is that we reap benefits when we volunteer. So one of the things that we, as a family, we have these family core values, and one of them is to serve others selflessly, basically, but finding the need and meeting it. And so that kind of was cool to see how like there is actually a not just religious but psychological basis for that being true, that when you give, you get back in a higher level. And then for the laws of thermodynamics, I can run through these quick if you want, because they are in my
Sure.
MindNode file here. The first law, energy can't be created or destroyed. Second law, everything always tends towards disorder. The third law is temperature approaches absolute zero. Entropy approaches a constant value. The fourth law, if 2 objects are in equilibrium with a third object, then they are in equilibrium with each other. And so all of that is to say that we are influenced by the people around us, regardless of the walls or barriers that we try to put up.
Yeah, and in that section, there's a piece that talks about literally walls and insulators, because information, if you think of information trying to come to an equilibrium and allowing information to cross lines and being easily shared, if it is easily shared, you have more common ground. You seek an equilibrium with those on the other side. If you don't have easily shared information, you can lead to extremes of thinking. And one of the examples that's brought up in there is the Berlin Wall and sharing information or not sharing information on 2 sides of Germany. So super fun stories involved there. We're not going to go into too much further. And then that brings us to the section on inertia, which I do want to spend a little bit of time on here, because they're talking about how one of the equations and such involved here is that basically if something's in motion, it's easier for it to stay in motion than it is for it to stop. And if something is stopped, it's harder for it to get moving than it is to stay stopped. Basically, that's what you're...
So let's just call a spade here. You wanted to talk about this section because it talks about habits, right?
No, actually.
We can't resist the habits discussion on this podcast.
I wasn't going to go there, but hey, we could do that. But yes, this one, there's a couple of examples that are brought up here that were fascinating to me. One was the use of lead in a lot of materials. If you've bought an older house or you've been around DIY stuff at all, you know that lead paint is a thing that's pretty much everywhere from a certain time period. Lead pipes are a thing. Lead was in many, 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 many much things. And over time, they've been slowly removing that from things, despite the fact that going back long, long time ago, we've known that it causes health issues, despite lots and lots of science and data, they've known that it can cause death and serious side effects. So why is it taking so long to get rid of some things? Like, it was like 50 years it took to actually get it out of a lot of systems. Contrast that with absinthe. I know you saw that one coming. The green alcohol that is supposedly claimed to cause hallucinations and such. It was supposed that absinthe caused a lot of like mental, I guess, hallucinations and delusions. But it led to, I think this was in France. It led to the absinthe murders. It was a guy who killed his family, and then they ended up banning absinthe, and then they were studying it and found out that it doesn't actually cause any of those things. It was all just false perception. And it's only recently that they've started to bring it back into certain areas, but it was dropped off very quickly instead of taking long time. But the reason for that is because with lead, it was used in so many different ways, and it was beneficial to, like, in certain properties. It had a lot of things going for it. It was used in a lot of different industries. Absinthe would just get you drunk. Like, that was all it had going for it. So it was very easy to drop that because it didn't have the mass, right? Didn't have a lot of places that it was being used, unlike lead. So it was a lot harder to get lead out of the supply chain than it was to get absinthe out. Hopefully that made sense.
It does make sense to me because the way that I thought about this section, they mentioned that the inertia of belief can make it hard to affect real change in the world. And I immediately thought of the word hustle because I wrote a book called Thou Shalt Hustle before I really understood what Gary Vaynerchuk was talking about when he started talking about hustle. And I don't think they're the same thing at all. And I don't think I'm going to be able to change or reclaim that definition.
Right.
Because there's so much inertia behind it. And so that is what it is. You know, you can either just live with it and say, that's not what that means, and try to convince the much smaller audience I have than
Right.
Gary Vee, like, hey, what you heard before isn't true. Or just go with the flow. You know, that's kind of the choice that you are left with. And I don't know. I don't think there's a formulaic right way to do it, but recognizing it is important because you got to know what sort of battle you're in for if you're really going to try and change people's minds about things. And inertia is not just as it pertains to the way people view a topic or think about a certain thing, but that's where my mind went.
Right. I mostly was thinking about it in the sense of, once you have something moving, it's not simple to change course or to get it to stop. The obvious way, as you're saying, as you mentioned when we first brought this up, is habits, right? Like, that's an obvious direction you can take this. But it does apply in a lot of different areas. Like, if you already have the train moving on a content creation process, if that's already in flow, it's a lot easier to keep it going. If you're trying to get that train moving, it takes a lot of work. We'll actually talk about that one a little bit here in the next section. But once it's moving, it has a lot of that inertia, and it's easy to keep it on track. So I think about this in terms of, a lot of things, actually. When I have a volunteer schedule and I've got people running for Sunday morning on different tasks, that whole cycle and system is a well-oiled machine at this point. It's very easy to keep that moving. And when I have to add a person or something slightly changes, you can just slightly course correct, and it's not that big a deal. But when I'm trying to implement an entirely new tool or a new scheduling system, like, that takes a lot of work because there's not anything already moving. Like, I have to get that momentum moving. It doesn't exist. So it does kind of help explain those situations.
And the mass of the object matters too. The bigger it is, the harder
Right.
it is to get it moving or to get it to stop, or I would argue to change its direction. I mean, this is a lot of what I am fighting in the day job is team of 17 people, and trying to change the way that we do things is not as simple as like, oh, well, let's just create a new system.
Right. Right. Wish it was that easy, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of interesting because going back to the Colby stuff, I am not a high quick start, but I can see like this is the way to improve this process. And I'm not used to being the one who's like, hey, let's just go do the thing.
Right. Right.
But that's my role a lot of times.
So the next section here is friction and viscosity. I think a lot of people understand what friction is. Viscosity is like the thickness of a material. So think of molasses versus water.
How hard it is for one layer of fluid to slide past another layer.
Yes,
That is viscosity.
technically. Good job. I like molasses versus water. It makes sense to me. Molasses has a higher viscosity than water. That's what I'm going to
Sure.
run with. It's my understanding of it. The part in here that I think is super interesting is actually this story about Chernobyl and how lots of stuff happening there, but the part of it that he's
so messed up.
I know there was so much. I was like, really? That was a thing? Come on. But basically, what was happening was there was a whole system in place that tried to slow down and prevent information from being shared, whether that was how to help the people who were impacted by the incident at Chernobyl, or the process that led up to the incident at Chernobyl. In both scenarios, information flow had a lot of friction. They had a lot of pain points, serious side effects to the people if they were to report on things, namely death. This is the culture that was created, and it meant that the entire situation was significantly worse than it probably should have been. And had those checks and balances not been so difficult, like if the information flow had not been so difficult, a lot of it probably wouldn't have happened. So that's purely in the sense of friction for sharing information. That's effectively what they had set up. And that, to me anyway, is a big alarm bell when it comes to like, how do I share information with my teammates? Like, is it easy or is it difficult? I have an action item specifically from that, which I've already completed. So woo! But that was
Good
to
job.
set up a whiteboard in my office. I don't think you can see it on camera. It's right here.
Cannot.
But the thing with this is it makes it easy for me and a few of the team members here to see what big projects are we working on. They have a place to write any notes to share with other people in the team. And then we can also manage like one-off problems. Like, I noticed this had an issue.
Yeah.
Go check the board. If it's written on it, great. Put your name next to it and add your name to the list of people who want to know when it's fixed. Otherwise, write it on the list. Like, that's a way for anybody to see what it is we're working on in those situations. It makes that information flow very easy. This is like the secondary piece of this chapter, which is resistance and making things easier to do. Eliminating friction, eliminating resistance, kind of all the same thing in that case. So anyway, that's an action item. Set up a whiteboard and start using it. Check. Got that one done.
Nice. Yeah, so you were talking about the information sharing in the Soviet Union and how that system was set up with intentional friction to prevent the communication.
Right.
The other example they use in this chapter is of Toyota creating a smoother environment and empowering workers to engage with their work, pulling the cord if they see something wrong so that things can be fixed, right? And I have an action item here from here as well to consider how can we get more lean at work? Again, reducing the friction in terms of communication so that we can move faster. I mean, that's kind of the big point at the end of this chapter. Reducing resistance is often easier than using more force. But I have a question that pops up just now as we're talking through this. Can you think of a situation where more friction would actually be a beneficial thing? And I don't mean like the Soviets had a specific end in mind. and they wanted to keep people in the dark. Like, I think
Right.
we can all agree that's bad.
Right.
That's generally not a good thing.
Yeah.
Is
So
there a generally good scenario where friction is a positive instead of a negative?
I think it's always going to depend on the perspective, right? But two examples, one of which I think Martin's already pegged in the chat. But for me personally, I want a lot of friction in place for getting Joe's phone number. I make that hard to get a hold of my cell phone number. We have our whole church database system so you can keep track of, everybody's contact information. And I don't even put my phone number in that because I've had cases where people go in and find it and they give it out. Like our staff members go grab that and hand it out to congregation members. So I took it out. So if they want to share that number, they have to come talk to me first. So it's gotten more difficult for people in general to get a hold of me. That's partially because I've had so many people like, can you come fix my printer? My Wi-Fi is not working in my house. Why can't I get this to connect to that? Like, I don't know. I'm not in charge of your house. Like, I don't have time to fix all of your houses. Like, I would be doing nothing but that for the church if it was that simple. So I want that friction, and I get that that's, and again, this is why I say it depends on your perspective. I see that as a very good thing. Some people see it as not a good thing.
So let me reframe this because I understand like the intentional friction around the personal stuff, and that all depends on your perspective.
Right.
You want to make it harder for somebody to get your information. Somebody else, on the other hand, wants to make it easier to reach out and get their problem solved.
Correct.
Is there anything at a larger scale that a society as a whole can all agree this is a positive application of friction that is not just eliminating something bad? I guess that's the obvious way that you would apply it, and I guess you could apply that for personal or group, but in terms of achieving a positive outcome, friction is always a bad thing, right? But in terms of preventing a negative outcome, that's when it can be viewed as a good thing. Is there any place that you can think of where those are crossed?
Yeah, the one that immediately comes to my mind is the concept of the tragedy of the commons. Familiar with this? So things like fishing, right? Were it not for checks and balances in limits and resistance to being able to fish a certain number, then big businesses come in and they will wipe out the entire population. So putting in that resistance and that requirement and caps, in this case, it would be government regulation to prevent that, means that the entirety of that species isn't wiped out. Is that fair? Is that kind of what you're thinking of?
Maybe. I guess this ties into something that is later on in the third section where they talk about democracies. I forget which chapter specifically that comes from. Maybe it was incentives. I don't remember.
Possibly.
But essentially they say that the problem with democracies is that you have millions of people all acting in their own self-interest.
Right, right.
So someone is deciding somewhere friction is good or bad.
Yes.
There's no collective unanimous, hey, friction is a good thing here because...
Right. Yeah. I think even if I look at what I just said, like the tragedy of the commons with fish, right? Even that resistance is seen as bad to somebody.
Right.
I don't know that universally you're going to find anything that's not considered universally positive, because there's always a different perspective that looks at it from the other side and says, I don't like that.
Yeah, so friction is positive when you're viewing it through a lens of what do I remove?
Right. Yeah, because I know that one of the things that Martin had brought up was like diet and food. What was I don't remember, it came up in a few different books, but the concept of making it more difficult for kids at school lunch lines to get soda and chips, like putting them not as the first thing in the line and putting them kind of off on their own, so it's not the easy thing to grab. Like, that's putting friction in place. It's putting resistance in place. Even then, the kids would say that's a bad idea. So
yeah, I call it out just because, going all the way back to the beginning of when and how do you use these mental models.
Yep.
I think recognizing, do I want to add something or do I want to remove something?
Right.
That could be a clue as to what mental model you want to select.
I don't know that you're going to find a universal in that one. It's much too slippery.
Agreed.
It's very viscous. So there's 3 more sections here. No, 2 more sections before we get into chemistry. One is velocity, which people regularly misunderstand velocity and just assume it's how fast you're going. But people don't usually know this, but when I was in college, I did take a couple of advanced calculus-based physics classes, and we would regularly get into debates about different velocity things, because velocity isn't just speed in a direction. Well, it is speed in a direction. It's not just how fast you're going. So whatever speed you're going, it has a calculation of what direction that speed is being pointed at. That's velocity. And I loved some of the stories in here around Napoleon. So he was talking a lot about Napoleon and how he conquered a lot of places due to speed, but he always gave his troops a direction. He had velocity, and it was all based on that. So anyway, that concept can be used in a lot of different ways. The other section here is
can we talk about velocity and task management for a second?
Sure, why not?
I've got a beef with the way most people use task managers, and that is they put in all the metadata. They let the computer be the computer and say, based on the context, the due date, the start date, whatever, here's everything you got to do today. And it's like 25 items long. And the natural approach is, okay, this is the stuff I got to get done. I'm going to crank through these things. And I think that is an example of speed without considering direction or velocity.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's actually one of the things I had thought about on it, is because it's easy to say, like, I'm going to move fast on these things today, but unless you're pointing those things at the direction you want, like what your mission is, what your goal is, Mike, whatever goals you've set, if you're pointed at those,
I'll allow it.
then you're running towards success. But if you're just aimlessly doing a whole bunch of things very quickly, that's still a failure. So it's velocity, not speed.
Yes. And then the other thing from here, sorry, I end up talking about every single one of these chapters, but they talk about how it's easier to redirect. Yeah, you did. They talked about how it's easier to redirect a canoe than a battleship. And with the day job, I mentioned 17 employees. That feels like a battleship sometimes.
Yep.
And it occurs to me that the way to steer that ship more effectively is to have, this is going all the way back, and I hate to reference this book, The 4 Disciplines of Execution.
Man, that is way back.
And the scoreboard.
40X.
I mean, that's not the only place they talk about it, but having that scoreboard where everybody can see this is the result of the velocity, not just the speed. Like, people will tend to just do the things and try to move fast if they don't have that unifying direction of, like, this is where we're going to go. And the scoreboard is the thing that gets everybody going in the same direction. I have been in the day job long enough to realize the effects of not having that and also having that.
Yes. So the last chapter in this section is leverage. And it's just what it sounds like. If you have control over something, have power in a situation, that is something that you can then use to leverage yourself into a different place. Think of levers. Sometimes this term leverage gets used in a lot of different ways, and it's not always clear what people mean by it. But if you think about a lever with a fulcrum, like a teeter-totter, it gives you a force that you can apply elsewhere against something else. That's the easy way to think about it.
Yeah, there are 3 types here, and basically where the force, the fulcrum, and the weight are distributed. That's all in the MindNode file. People are interested in that. But the thing that I thought was interesting with this is the 3 questions about leverage. How do I know when I have it? Where and when should I apply it? And how do I keep it? I feel like those are great, just like thinking time questions. There's no simple answer to those. But also, this is the thing that you should be seeking to get, and leverage itself is not a bad thing. They make the point that leverage is amoral. So most people, I think, if they don't have leverage, they don't have that influence, they resent the fact sometimes that it's been used against them when they're not in alignment with the outcome that people are trying to drive. And so they kind of push back on that. Oh, that's a bad thing, right? I don't want to manipulate people. You don't have to manipulate people. You don't have to use it in a bad way, but you should be considering when you have leverage, and you should be considering how to use it. And then also recognizing that you don't always have to use it. Just because you have leverage doesn't mean that you should use it. You have to take into account its impact on the people that are around you as well.
I think Silent in the chat has a great kind of example for this, because
best example of leverage I've ever heard.
Their comment here: I leverage Mike and Joe's time reading to find out if I will read a book or not. That's exactly what we're talking about. Using something to help you make a decision or something you're going to do, right? So, and we know this. A lot of people use Bookworm as a pre-filter for books that they're going to read. Like it's kind of a precursor to choosing a book to read. Absolutely. Like that's leveraging the podcast to save yourself time in choosing books, right? So absolutely do that. Good job. Well done, Silent. 1,000 points. That brings us to what? The next section? Am I there?
Yep.
Yes. Chemistry. Oh, chemistry. Chemistry was one of my least favorite classes. Did you have to take chemistry in college?
Yes, I did, because I was a biology major for my first year.
Got it.
So I took lots of biology and lots of chemistry.
Got it.
But only for a year.
I had a lot more on the math side. So the physics side was the part I was deep into. I did a fair amount of biology stuff because of the agricultural side of my degree, but the chemistry piece was not really there. I was not chemistry. Anyway, all that to say, the first chapter here is on activation energy. This is the one that I was kind of alluding to earlier when we were talking about inertia, in that activation energy is the amount of energy it takes to get something moving forward. Like that's what gets us, gets something started. And it's not what it's not what is used to keep it going. It's what it takes to get it moving, right? I don't really have any of the specific examples here that I'd care to reiterate, but the part about it that I thought was interesting is that if you have activation energy, you have to have enough of it to get the ball rolling, so much so that it will continue rolling once that activation energy is depleted.
Yep.
Think about that for a second. And then think about some of the things we've talked about already. So take which one? Let's take task management, because that's fun to talk about. If you're setting up a new task management system and you're working through the process of how is that going to be used in a lot of different scenarios, you have to have a lot of energy up front to not only set it up, but also keep it moving once you've got it started long enough that it becomes perpetuating, right? That it becomes something that can keep itself going, because otherwise it drops off, it fails, it's boring, it's not working, I'm going to quit. Like this is a lot of like the dieting and exercise thing that happens after New Year's.
Yes,
people have
exactly.
a little bit of activation energy because it's New Year's, but they don't have enough to get it into the territory of becoming a change holistically.
Yep. So that was the example that I was thinking of in terms of activation energy and habits, specifically around diet and exercise, because I have been working out long enough that I have seen it every single year that right after New Year's, there are about 3 times the number of people in the gym because they have made a quick decision and they have not thought through how much effort this is actually going to take to do this multiple times a week for the rest of your life.
Yep.
And build out the system in order to protect the time and space to do that. And so they burn out, right? And that is the obvious example that I think a lot of people can relate to, either because they see it or they've fallen prey to it themselves. And I've been on both ends of that, by the way. But the point is that change that doesn't last is easy. And so this mental model really should be applied anytime you're thinking about any sort of behavioral change. I am forced to ask myself all of the action items that I failed on at the beginning of this episode.
Yep.
Why didn't I follow through with those things? And if I am going to follow through with those things, I also have to ask the question, is this something that I want to continue to do? If it's something that I want to continue to do, if it's going to become a habit, I need to automatically assume, okay, it just increased from here to here. Like it's exponentially more work in order to get this done. And just recognizing that, I feel would provide a ton of value, because now if you're viewing this thing as this giant change you're trying to affect, you're forced to consider, well, if I'm going to make this big change in my life, what are the things that I'm not going to do in order to make this happen? And just thinking about things that way, like I don't have a number in mind. What do you think the impact that has on your potential success rate? I mean, it's got to go from like the 10% for the people who just say they're going to start doing something, right? Up to 75, 80 because you're taking it seriously. And I say taking it seriously just in terms of you're giving it the amount of weight that it should actually have. And that's a really cool application of a mental model. I just wanted to call it out because I think that's why this stuff is so great, because you can't really predict the ways that this stuff is going to benefit you until you start like trying these on for size. And then you're like, oh, that's why it didn't work last time.
Right. And like you're saying, the more time you spend planning, you're effectively building up a store of activation energy. So if I'm planning and putting together, like before it actually has launched, like we're building up all of that. And then when you get to the starting day, you have all of that built up and you can take off. Like whenever I do these outdoor events, we've spent probably 3 weeks, a month and a half planning and building and collecting and deciding and architecting and drawing out plans of all sorts of stuff. That's all like building up that activation energy, and then it all gets launched all on that day. And usually about noon, we're done and ready to go crash because we've just spent the entire day exploding with that energy to get it all to happen very quickly. So it's kind of that concept, right? One of the things that, like one of the stories in here, at least on a high level, I'm not going to tell the specific story, but whenever you hear about coups and overthrowing governments and such and trying to break down existing constructs, the part that is oftentimes forgotten is the amount of energy and time and effort it takes to build up a new structure to replace the one that you just destroyed. So whenever you're breaking something down and you want to like get past that negative thing that you're seeing as detrimental, you got to have enough energy to not only destroy that problem, but build up whatever it is that's going to replace it. You don't get to just break down all the stuff you don't like and then everything's hunky-dory and fine after that. No, you have to put something back in place of it, especially if it's like a government overthrow. Like you're not going to just tear it down and everybody's going to be okay. Like you've just removed all hierarchy. So every man for himself, like that's not going to go well. Welcome to the Wild West. That didn't turn out great, did it? So let's not do that.
Yep. And then the other thing here is that the reactions are not always quick. So what you're talking about, don't underestimate the effort. They have a different way of explaining this in the book. They talk about the bonds that have to be broken, and then you also have to create new ones to replace that. That just sounds like a lot of work.
Yes.
So yeah, recognize that it's a lot of work. Recognize that it's not going to necessarily change overnight, and then are you willing to put in that amount of effort for a sustained period of time in order to achieve that outcome that you want?
So the next section here is about catalysts.
I like this one.
This one's kind of fun. Catalysts accelerate change. So if the change is currently in action, a catalyst takes that change and makes it happen faster.
But is not consumed by the reaction.
Correct. It's not consumed by the reaction.
So this is not pouring gasoline on the fire.
And it's also not what starts the change either. So the change is started by an external force. This is why this comes after activation energy. You got your activation energy, it gets something started, and then you can have a catalyst come in and accelerate that change. And there's a whole bunch of examples here. The easiest one for us to probably understand are Instagram or social media influencers. This is the easy one. Let's say that Mike's already excited. Let's say that there's a product or an idea that has been started, and one of these influencers or social media stars, if you will, takes it and talks about it. What happens? It perpetuates and becomes more and more popular. That's a very easy way to think about a catalyst. That's what a catalyst is. It's a social media influencer. The chemists are upset right now.
Trying to think of a positive application of that, and I can't. So, yeah, I don't know. I would like Bookworm to be a catalyst for people buying more physical books.
Does that work? I don't know.
But I don't know if that's actually happening. I don't know. So maybe I should just step on the soapbox here for a moment. You know, the fact that you have read an outline does not mean that you have read the book. The fact that you have listened to an audible version does not mean you have read the book. Just like you listen to this podcast, you don't engage with it. The audio just keeps moving, whether you're paying attention or not. So that's not the hard work. The hard work is when you have to force your eyeballs to move across the page and answer the question, what did I just read?
Yes. Yep.
And it doesn't automatically advance when you stop paying attention. So, yeah, I am a firm believer that physical books are the way to go. Kindle books, I will concede the point to Martin. Kindle books are acceptable. I do think, for me personally, physical books are better. I read more because I started buying physical books, 100%. If you read more because you started buying Kindle books, more power to you. I would love to see the data to support that, though.
I don't know if Bookworm is a catalyst, or maybe it's I don't know if it would classify.
You get what I'm saying, though, because the intended change is we want people to buy physical books.
Yep.
Right. Not just listen to audio. So if a certain number of people, the trend is that people are buying ebooks and they're specifically just listening to audiobooks, we can say, well, you shouldn't do that. You should buy physical books. And then if there's a bump in the data, people buying physical books, that would be technically catalyst. Like that's kind of what we're looking for. I'm trying to spin your social media influencer thing in a positive way, and I'm failing at it.
I just don't know that Bookworm is the right example there, because I struggle to know if Bookworm would be the catalyst or an additional activation energy to get somebody to start. It would depend on the person and where they're at in the journey. Because for some people, we would be the starting point. Like, you don't read at all. Well, listen to Bookworm, learn about these books, and maybe it'll spark that energy to get you to start. Like, that could be a person.
I'm just going to lean into this now. Bookworm is a catalyst because catalysts decrease the amount of energy required to cause change. So if we're trying to get people to read more books, we've already had multiple people in the chat today say that they use this as a screener. Then they decide, okay, I'm going to read that one. And there are a couple people who have said, I can't wait for my volume 2 of Great Mental Models to arrive so I can read this. So we are absolutely a catalyst.
Okay, so we're a social media influencer since we push things on social media.
No, don't go there.
We won't talk about how so much of our marketing is done on social media. Okay.
Social media, since you continue to talk about this, let's talk about the other example they use in this section. The Black Death was a catalyst for societal change. Instagram is the Black Death.
Way more fun. It's true. You are absolutely correct. Black Death was, as weird as that is to say, a great catalyst for change in a lot of positive ways.
Yep.
But we don't want to talk about that because it's just icky to talk about how something that killed so many people was a positive. It's just, it feels very wrong. But
okay, well, let's just as controversial.
Oh, good. Oh, good.
I'll say COVID was a catalyst. Because
True.
it changed the way that we do a lot of different things. The way that we work specifically has changed forever. There is no way you're going to get people to go 100% back. Little pockets, maybe. Individual small companies, yes. But as a society, it is now acceptable to work from home. And there is nothing business owners can do about it.
Right.
That is what employees expect because it has been proven that it works. Right. So that's an example of a change that was brought on by a catalyst.
Sure. Okay. Hey, whatever you need to do, dude. Like this is totally fine. All right, the last section in chemistry, I'm not going to spend much time on it unless Mike decides to bring it up even more, but alloying, like an alloy. Think of two metals put together. Like, it's just a weird word to say, alloying. How do you enunciate that one? Anyway, when you put two things together, they both become better at the other end, right? So think of like peace treaties. Both parties end up better when they work together. Maybe not necessarily treaties, but peace treaties, but treaties in general. Anytime you have two things that are working together towards a common goal, and they become better together than apart, right? So it's not 1 + 1 = 2. It's 1 + 1 = 4, that concept, right? That math doesn't work.
This is why we read books. I mean, the best example here at the end, they talk about how knowledge is the ultimate alloy. And they talk about Leonardo da Vinci, how he was a genius because he could combine knowledge from different disciplines. That's, if I were to summarize my goal from reading all these books, that's what I want to be able to do. I want to be able to take these ideas and mash them up with those other ideas and get something totally new in the process. And, oh, hey, that's the thing that really changed my life.
Right. Yeah, it is fascinating. You know, we've continued to talk about this syntopical piece here. It is amazing how much the connections between books and seeing a holistic view across them is more revelatory than reading one of them. And 5 years ago, I don't think I could have told you that that was a thing that even existed. But now I'll tell you should read a lot and read widely because you get to see a much broader picture and you can have a much better view of the world if you do that.
Obligatory mention of the How to Read a Book episode.
Yep.
Link in the show notes. By the way, it cracks me up every time we talk about that because that is episode 42, I believe. And 42, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, is the answer to life, the universe, and everything. So
that
obviously the answer to life, the universe, and everything is read more books.
Huh. I did not connect all those dots, but that is amazing. So there you go. The answer to life is how to read a book. Great fun. Let's go on to the last section here, which is the biggest, actually. Biology. Okay. And we start off with 2 parts on evolution, which I thought was interesting that they broke it down into essentially 4 pieces across 2 parts. The first part being natural selection and extinction. And they specifically call out that it's a little bit odd to do that, knowing that natural selection can lead to extinction, but they call it out because natural selection can work within a given species, not necessarily wiping it all out, right? So there's that. I didn't really want to spend a whole lot of time on evolution because it's evolution, and I feel like even scientists have been telling me that it's not necessarily true, so it's a bit weird to think of it and talk about it because even I've got scientists telling me that this isn't a thing, so whatever.
Okay.
There's that.
Well, I'll summarize these 2 chapters, and I think the application of this is disconnected from what you're talking about.
Sure.
So the first part, natural selection and extinction. Natural selection is non-random elimination, which I think that definition, when I read that, I was like, oh, this can apply anywhere.
Yeah.
So it's just the reduction of options based on certain characteristics. And that's the goal here with the mental models, right? Is how do we see this stuff at play in other domains? And then extinction doesn't occur in isolation. It's not just this thing ceases to exist because this thing ceases to exist. There are outside factors that contribute to that. And then part 2 is where they talk about the adaptation rate, and then they call it the Red Queen effect. So adaptation is both a noun and a verb, which I think is interesting. Adaptation requires leaving or being forced from your comfort zone when you observe and experience new threats. Well, every time you read a book and you encounter a contrary idea, that is potentially a new threat. And you have a choice whether you are going to adapt or you are going to bury your head in the sand and pretend that that thing is not there, whatever. So I like this a lot.
Okay.
I feel this is a good summarization of the growth mindset. You have ideas, you have beliefs, you continue to look for new information, you be willing to admit when you are wrong, you be willing to change your beliefs. That is adaptation. That is the thing that fights against extinction. In fact, the thing that's kind of interesting about this is like just pretending that the threat isn't there. That complacency, that can be the thing that ends up killing you. That can be the thing that brings about the extinction. And yeah, I don't want to get into a debate about the science part of this,
Yes.
but as I consider how this applies to a personal development journey, I think this is pretty cool.
That I could get on board with. Yes. But the broader, yes. 100%. Sure. So after the evolution piece, there's this supporting idea of competition. Basically, survival of the fittest, I guess, is that concept. Not quite that extreme, but that concept. Then they get into a section called ecosystem. I do want to spend a little bit of time here because this one is where you start talking about things like culture and the broader interconnected pieces of animals, people in connection to each other, in relationship to each other, and how those impact one another. And they give the example of, what was it, sea otters and sea urchins and kelp, and how if you remove the sea otters from the mix, they're not eating the sea urchins, which in turn eat the kelp, which in turn lead to a healthier environment for all sorts of things. And so you got to have sea otters, like they're a keystone species, as they called it. So you got to have those, but there's also situations where if you change the ecosystem, you change the environment that an animal or a situation is operating within, it can have wildly different effects. One of these stories was about breeding elephants. I forget the sub type of elephant that they were talking about, but it's on the verge of extinction. And instead of like sectioning off an area where the wild ones can be, kept close to each other so that they don't become extinct, instead they've been doing artificial insemination and trying to help them breed.
Yes, the intervention bias.
Yes. So they stepped in, and it's led to all sorts of problems.
They shouldn't have stepped in. They should have just stopped being jerks.
Pretty much, yeah, because it's now led to infant mortality rates increasing and just a lot of problems.
That's the intervention bias in a nutshell, is the desire to always do something instead of leaving things alone. So recognizing that you're impacting this ecosystem and it's having negative effects, rather than stop affecting the ecosystem, the response is, well, let's just take all these elephants captive and we'll try to breed them in captivity. But now we have a bunch of depressed elephants.
Yep. Who are having health problems because we kept them in captivity and they're not okay with that. Okay.
Yeah, I think this is interesting, and it forces me to consider, where is my intervention bias? Where are the things that I try to fix when really they'd be fixed if I would just stop meddling with them?
Yes. Yes. Honestly, this is going to sound weird. We struggle with this a little bit at our house with our homestead, because we have animals on that farm. I hesitate to call it a farm, but there's chickens, cats, like these are animals that we're taking care of. They're all outdoor. And when do you intervene in certain situations, and when do you let nature take its course? Right? So it's a tough one. And when you have kids trying to help you make decisions, it gets messier yet. So yes, that one's a bit of a challenge. Anyway, ecosystems, I specifically wanted to bring it up because if you translate that to productivity, habits, making changes, this is a big deal because changing the system, the ecosystem that you're operating within can oftentimes help you make those changes much easier. And it would then change the amount of, if you use some of these other models, it would change the amount of activation energy you need to make those changes and would make you less dependent on a catalyst to make long-term effects permanent. So the example here is is it Bill Walsh? Does that sound right?
Yes.
Yeah, Bill Walsh.
I love this. I wrote down this quote too, yeah.
Yeah, so he was winning the Super Bowl, NFL. I don't remember the teams. Do you have the teams written down? But
yeah, I'm a football fan.
Okay,
so
you should tell this then.
He took over the 49ers and they were terrible. And then he just started working on the culture and getting everybody to believe in the team, put the team first, do the right things the right way. And he wrote a book called The Score Will Take Care of Itself. But the quote here is that the critical factor whenever people work together is that they expect something of each other. And I loved this because, as I mentioned a couple times already, big challenges I'm facing right now I have to do with the day job and shifting expectations with a large number of people who have done things a certain way for a very long time. Right? So you can't just be like, hey, we're going to go this way now.
Right.
You have to, when you're creating a culture like this, there has to be this mutual dependency on each other. You have to trust each other. You have to rely on each other. And this is why something like the 5 dysfunctions of a team is so fascinating to me, because if that trust isn't there, if people don't expect something of each other, that mutual alignment is broken, and then everything just stops working. You don't see it right away in a business. You can continue to sell the products and the systems continue to work, and it kind of slowly over time, the revenue goes down and the other numbers go down and the bad numbers go up, and you look back a year later and you're like, how did we get here? But it happens so slowly that you don't even realize it a lot of times.
Yes. So my point and what I was getting at is like Bill Walsh made this big change, like culturally. He changed the entire environment that the team was operating within, and that led to massive change. What was it, 3 years, and they won the Super Bowl after he joined?
Yep.
And like that's what we're talking about. So altering the situation, it's a big deal. That's my point.
Cool. By the way, on the topic of the 5 dysfunctions of a team, I have a new favorite Patrick Lencioni book.
Ooh, and
Death by Meeting.
Death by Meeting.
So the title is kind of clickbaity. It's not actually about how meetings are bad. The big takeaway from the book actually is that meetings don't have to suck. And the question that they ask at the in the middle of the fable is like, well, why do people like going to movies but don't like going to meetings? Right. I don't want to turn this into a discussion about that book. I'll just leave it there. But it actually is really good.
Interesting.
I've read it recently and it's awesome. I listened to it recently, but I have also read it recently. I have 2 physical copies that I have read before
Good work.
Listened to it.
Did you read each one? Like, I read that book and then I read that one.
Yeah, typically what I will do if I have both of those, I will read it first and then I will listen to it again to just see what kind of pops out to me. Never the other way around, by the way.
All right, good to know. All right, the other sections here, I'm going to kind of run through these fairly quick. Stop me if you want to talk about one more, Mike, because the one I want to spend more time on is actually the last one. So the one after ecosystem is niches, basically finding your spot inside that broader ecosystem where you are a key component to that ecosystem. So that would be finding your niche. You hear that phrase quite a bit. Self-preservation is the one after that. Pretty much what you would expect. I'm going to look after myself and make sure I'm not the one that gets killed here. Like that's what we're talking about. Whether you're in corporate. A lot of discussion of fight versus flight in that section, which is kind of interesting. Yep. When do you go to battle? When do you say, nope, I'm done? Like that's what we're talking about. Replication. When something's working and going well, repeat it. If
I do have something about this one.
Okay.
Because the thing in here that I liked was commander's intent. And I don't even remember the exact story that this came from. I think it was the German army. And the commander's intent is the sweet spot between execution of strategy and the flexibility to adapt to changing conditions. There's 4 elements to commander's intent: formulate, communicate, interpret, and implement. And basically, from a business perspective, what I thought of this is that you want to, when you're communicating up and down the chain of command, you want to give people the information that they need to make the right decisions. You don't want to try to overprocess things. That's kind of what I'm dealing with, is like so rigid, these processes, and then like people follow the process and they don't stop to think like, why are we doing this in the first place? And to me, it's like pretty obvious this is not the right thing to do in this situation. So why didn't you stop and consider that? Like, because I'm following the process.
Yep.
Right. So this has got me thinking about all of the SOP process, because work the system, stuff like that we've read, it's like document every single process. And this, I think, is a little bit different. I want to document every single process, but I want to document it in a way that it communicates commander's intent, as they talk about it here. Here's the information you need. Now you go and do what you think is right.
Okay, there you go. Do that. Good job, Mike. Rinse and repeat, right? So after replication, we have cooperation. So cooperating with other people, working with other people to get things done. It's probably the very high level view of that. That comes with the supporting idea of Dunbar's number. Did you read this part in detail?
I did. I don't have a whole lot written down from that. I'm familiar with Dunbar's number, and I did not write down everything that they talk about in this book because it is ginormous. It would be twice as big as the mind map I created, which broke MindNode, by the way, for principles. If I would have tried to do that, I basically took the approach that I tell everybody else to take when they are creating their own book notes. Jot down the things that are relevant to you, the things that you want to noodle on. And so I don't have anything in my mind map from Dunbar's number. However, I will say that cooperation and trust is something I have been thinking about a lot lately. And I do have an action item from this section on how often do I look for opportunities to cooperate.
So the Dunbar's number piece, the reason I brought it up is like this was something that was fascinating to me a while back. But anyway, the number is 150 is the main number that we're talking about here. Basically, it's friendships, relationships that you can maintain. You can maintain an inner core of closeness of friendships of 5 people. You have a close friend group of about 15, 50 like basic friends and acquaintances, and then 150 is like the size of a community that you feel like you know names and faces and pretty much know those people. The 500 people here is a category that's like friends of friends. It's like you maybe met them once, but you're not going to have any form of contact with them. And then 1,500 people is like the upper limit of anyone that you could potentially put a name or face to. That's the upper limit. And I know some people that number is probably way lower than that. Just saying. Like, you are terrible with names and faces. I'm actually pretty good with that, but
I'm not. So I might be lower. And I think maybe that's the thing I've always not really liked about Dunbar's number. Like, it's a good starting point.
Right.
And I can see how those numbers can be relevant. You can't be everybody's close friend. You got to pick and choose your close friends, for example. But after that, like, what do you really do with that?
Correct. Like, okay, that's fun. Fun number. The next section is hierarchical. I can't get that word out. Organization. Hierarchical organization. Basically, where do you fit in the hierarchy of whatever group you're talking about, and understanding how that applies to your role in that organization. That's probably the easy way to understand it. Incentives. You kind of alluded to this one earlier. Setting up incentives that help drive the actions and behaviors that you're after, right? All sorts of examples in there as well. And then the last one that I want to spend a little bit of time on here is tendency to minimize energy output. Basically, I'm lazy and I don't want to do anything, and I would like for things to happen without me having to do a whole lot.
Yeah. Are you familiar with VeggieTales?
Oh, yes. Yes.
All right. I think it's the pirates who don't do anything.
Yeah. I have this song in my head
There's
immediately.
Yeah, there's a Gord in that one who is lazy, and he has all these contraptions that he builds, and he calls them labor-saving devices. That's immediately what I thought of.
The general premise here is like we'll take the path of least resistance and we'll easily hunt, or we will spend a decent amount of time trying to save ourselves time, which doesn't make sense. And yet it's a thing that we will continue to do. At the same time, because we don't want to spend a lot of time making certain decisions or acting on things, we have a tendency to generalize and use previous experience to make a snap decision or make a quicker decision, which oftentimes is positive. Like it helps us build experience, and we can, have more accurate information at our fingertips because we've had so much experience with it. So you're better at making those assumptions. It can have a negative to it. Sometimes people get really bent out of shape over like stereotypes. Like, you shouldn't stereotype me. Like, well, they exist for a reason. Like, people stereotype me all the time. It's fairly common. I'm the tech guy, so people immediately assume all sorts of things. The problem is I came from a farm.
It's a shortcut that fires. The shortcut fires in your brain. You really can't do anything about it initially, anyways. It's going
Correct.
to be there.
Yeah, so it's fascinating to me the number of folks that assume things like you're gonna cut your leg off if you run that chainsaw. It's like, do you know how many trees I've cut down with chainsaws over the years? Like, just because I'm the tech guy does not mean I'm completely incapable of running a chainsaw. Like, simple things like that can permeate without us even realizing it. So because we have a tendency to want to minimize the amount of energy it takes to make decisions, we'll oftentimes use those snap reactions.
Yeah, one of the ways that we tend to minimize energy output is through the practice of satisficing. I like this word.
Yep.
I like this concept. If for nothing else, to recognize when you're doing this so you can push back against it. Satisficing is when you find the first thing in your brain that satisfies your minimum acceptable conditions. So as it pertains to evaluating options and figuring out what's the right path to take, your brain is going to latch onto something initially, and if you want to really spend some time and make the right decision, then you have to recognize that and consider other options. However, there are times when it does make sense to just go with your gut. The first one, I tend to be on the other end of this, I think, where I overthink things and I over-research things, and I would probably be better off if I went with the first thing that my brain found with satisfies the minimum acceptable conditions. But when it comes to big, important decisions, this is something I feel like you can maybe fall into. Especially quick starts. You want to take action quickly because you value the action itself, and you can't steer a parked car, so it's easy to attach to something and then just resolve in your mind this is the right way to go, and then you basically block off all the other inputs. That's the dangerous part of this, I think, the shadow side, if you will.
That, and if you're not aware of the side effects of what you're doing too, like they talked about open format offices, open layout offices, yep. Cubicles, and how it's a lot less money and a lot less work to build an open layout office plan. Like from a resources stance, it's cheaper to build, it's cheaper to maintain, it's cheaper to heat and cool. It's all the things, right? So why wouldn't we want to do this? This is a better thing because it also makes it easier for people to have those one-off interactions, to have the creative aha moments because they're talking with people in finance when they're in animation. Like these things can happen, right? I'm not saying that those things don't happen, but the flip side of that is they know very well now that this is a bad idea, because when are you supposed to sit down and focus and do your work? When are you supposed to make those one-on-one phone calls that rely on trust and being open with somebody when you have 40 other people somewhere close to you that can hear your entire conversation? Like, that's not possible. So it doesn't happen. So then those relationships are not built. So then you end up not having those relationships at all. So although this concept of like energy conservation can oftentimes be desirable, it can have some pretty bad detriments.
Yep.
Don't do an open office plan. Please don't.
Agreed.
Bad day. That brings us to the very last of the book, which is just putting it all together, which I appreciate that they did this. It kind of needs a conclusion, but basically they're saying use these as tools and use them as models. You don't need to force it. Use them where they make sense. That's kind of what they're saying at the very end, but it's literally a page and a half. They don't need to do some big long thing. And then you're at the back of the book and there's picture credits, and that is it. It is 2 pages of picture credits and no appendix, no extra information. That's the book. Super interesting.
I'm okay with that.
I am okay with that. Yeah. So, unless there's something else, Mike, that brings us to action items.
No, let's do it.
So I have 2. One I talked about, which was putting up a whiteboard, but I already have that done. So probably doesn't count. They were talking about that in the chat. Does it even count if you already did it? Probably not. So put it on the list, but check it off. I don't know. Don't even put it on the list. Anyway, that has been helpful. The other one that I need to work on, this goes back to the ecosystem chapter, and I need to do a little work on my environment, I think. I feel like there are a handful of things, I'm not going to discuss them here, but there are a handful of things I've been trying to change in my like day-to-day work structure. It's probably the cleanest way to say that just aren't working well. And I think it's environment related, but I don't think I connected that until we read this book.
Sure.
So I need to do some work on that. And I don't know what's going to come of it, but I at least need to explore it. So that's what I got. That's my one kind of bigger one here. You would kind of expect to have a lot more here, but so much of this is just how you think. At least that's my perspective. You probably have 12 of these, right?
I do not.
Okay.
I have the 2 that I've shared here, although the environment, I do remember that coming up. Actually, it was in my notes. It was the chapter on replication, because once you get a feel for the environment, you can adapt it to better suit your needs. That was the point that they were making, and that got me thinking about the environment that I do my work in as well. And we did read a book about that, which was a great book, The Extended Mind by Annie Murphy Paul. So if you want to dive deeper into that topic, that's one I would recommend. And I don't know, kind of interesting to hear what sort of action items you come up with that, framed through the previous experience of that book.
Right.
That's where I'll be thinking when you share what you're going to change in your environment.
All right. Fair enough.
But my action items, I've got 2 just like thinking time questions, in addition to the 4 I failed with at the beginning. One of the questions I want to ask is, how can we get more lean at work? Just when I say more lean, I've kind of talked about a lot of different things in this episode, but basically allowing people to make the decisions that they think are best and do the work without extra process that slows everything down. And then the other question I want to consider is, how often do I look for opportunities to cooperate? And this one is a little bit more broad, because I think there are other domains where I want to consider this, not just work, although work is the one that comes to mind also for me in terms of there are opportunities here to take action on this. So those are mine. I captured both of yours. You have a check mark next to your whiteboard already.
Yes.
So good job.
I'm batting 50% right now. Good job. I like that. All right, style and rating. This book is a challenge, not in the sense that it's hard to read, but I also am not sure I'm a good person to tell you whether or not this will be easy for you to understand with the science explanations, because I think there were no, I'm kind of glancing at the list. I don't think there were any of these laws or theories that are the basis of these topics that I haven't studied in formal schooling in some way, shape, or form. So because of that, it's hard for me to know that when we're talking about friction, viscosity, thermodynamics, like I've studied those things before. So I don't know how much of that, if you haven't studied it at all, if that would be easy to understand in this book. I'm a bad read for that one for you. If you have any form of background on it, I will say that just from my stance, having been away from that formal study for quite some time, this was very easy for me to understand as far as the sciencey side of it. But that's not a big part of the book either. Like it's not, I wouldn't even say it's a quarter of the book. It's kind of these short explanations at the beginning to help you understand what those laws or theories are, like what the concept is. But we're only talking about maybe a page and a half on that per chapter out of, what did we decide, 397 pages, however many chapters this is. It's not even 20, so it's not much that's covering that. So that said, I feel like this is one that is approachable to many people. I think I'm going to preface it with that. That said, a lot of the stories in this, I think there were only a handful that I feel like I've heard before. This is one of those where they've done their homework for sure and helped us branch out into areas we haven't normally gone. I don't know of another book that I've ever encountered that takes these types of scientific concepts and explains the general world and culture around us using those theories and concepts. I don't know that I've ever encountered that. So I absolutely love that process. On a weird note, there was some like editing things that were wrong here, like some sentences that just had bad, like the editor didn't catch it. And I noticed at least a handful of those, which was a bit strange. I suppose we didn't talk about this. This was published by Automatic, sponsored by Automatic. Latticework Publishing is the group that did it. Automatic is the team behind WordPress, if you don't know them. They also did Volume 1. I assume they did Volume 3. I would assume they did all three of them. But the form factor of this book is top-notch. It's one of these that's done extremely well. Full color book. They have photographs of many things in here. So anyway, it's a well-made book. I was shocked to find some of the editing things in it that seemed pretty blatant to me. Maybe I just didn't understand their sentence structures, but in some cases, the words are simply in the wrong places in that sentence. So that was kind of an oddity, but it's easy to overlook that, I find, because of the breadth of knowledge that they're covering and the wide spectrum of places that it can be applied. So absolutely loved going through this. It's definitely going to color the way I view certain situations and try to help me understand a different perspective on some things. So absolutely love that I've been able to go through this now. I don't know how I would rate this anything other than a 5.0. Like, this is a solid book that I think many, if not all, should read if you wanted to branch out in your thinking and are willing to look past the table of contents, which can be a bit daunting, as we talked about early on. It's like this, like, are you sure we should be reading this? This just seems like I don't want to sit here and talk about science for an hour and a half. I mean, I could do that, but it just seems a little odd. That's absolutely not what we're doing. So obviously, seeing the way we've had to lay out this episode, I feel like is a pretty good view of what you're going to get when you go through the book. So I'm putting it at 5.0.
All right. I will join you at 5.0. I was ready to rate it lower than the first one because those mental models are ones that I refer to all the time. These ones I don't think I will refer to all the time. Looking at the table of contents, I was like, I haven't thought about some of these things for many years. I don't feel like my life is any less full because I have neglected these mental models, having gone through it and seen the application of these science ideas in other domains. I got way more out of it than honestly I expected to. I expected to enjoy it because it's great mental models. I did not expect to enjoy it as much or possibly even more than the first one, but that is what happened. It is definitely a big book.
Yep.
I understand why these models are in volume 2. I think I would have taken the same approach, put the 7 I think there are in the first one, and then save these for the rest. Reading this does make me excited to read through the third one as well, which is on my bookshelf and is just as big, if not bigger. Same approach, different domains that maybe you don't have any interest in just looking at the table of contents. However, this is the great mental models that you know and love. So I would encourage you to put in the effort and read them if that is an interesting topic to you at all.
So we have a 550.
Double five, yep.
There was a name for those. You call them gold books?
Golden books, yep.
Golden books. Woo!
Joshua has a logo for these. I got to figure out how to get on the website.
There you go. Okay. Well, it's a great book, that's for sure. No pun intended there. Let's put it on the shelf. What's next, Mike?
Next is Where Good Ideas Come From by Steven Johnson. And this, I think, is going to be a fun follow-up from the Great Mental Models.
I hope so. You've kind of been on this creativity track lately, so.
Yes, I have, for better or for worse.
Yeah. So following that, so Where Good Ideas Come From by Steven Johnson. Following that, I've discovered a book called Ritual. This is by Dimitris Xygalatas. I did look up how to pronounce this one. It's Xygalatas. Xygalatas. How seemingly senseless acts make life worth living. This has to do with rituals that cultures and people do and why we do them, even though they'd make no sense whatsoever. Why do we do chants at football teams, at football games? Like, why do we do that? That's the type of thing this book covers. Should be interesting.
Gotcha. Yeah, this sounds intriguing. Never heard of this before.
I hadn't heard of it till about a week ago, and it got my interest very quickly. Anyway, Gap books, Mike, what do you got?
I have lots of Gap books. Well, lots of books that should be read as Gap books.
Sure. It's like, wow, you've been busy.
I'm going to throw this one out there because I actually have one on the way to me. I'll be getting it a little bit early. The Laws of Creativity by Joey Kofone, the founder of Baron Fig. I am on this creativity kick, as you have mentioned. He's going to be on the Focus podcast, and I promised I would get through this book before I talk to him. So I'm going to do it.
So you have to. You have no
I
options.
have to. Yep.
All right. Well, if it's any good, we should do it on Bookworm, but I'll let you read it and make that call.
Sounds good.
Oh, super fun. So thanks to you, those of you who have joined us in the chat. It's been kind of fun to see some of those, and you're looking some stuff up and helping us figure out what we've got wrong. So thanks for that. If you would like to join us on these adventures of recording, you can check out our YouTube channel, youtube.com/bookwormfm. And as I mentioned it early on in the episode, I've been posting all of the previous live streams, which actually goes back to like episode 112, I think. Somewhere in there. I don't know that for certain. Somewhere in that range. So if you want to watch these, again, you can go do that. We also, if you haven't already, you can join our Bookworm membership. And you can do that for $5 a month, bookworm.fm/membership. And we've talked about many things, many perks that come along with that membership. But the biggest and most important of all of those is our undying gratitude towards you to help keep the lights on for Bookworm. So we're absolutely grateful to those of you who do that and wish the best to all of you who do that and hope that the rest of you will join them.
Yes, absolutely. If you are reading along with us, pick up Where Good Ideas Come From by Steven Johnson. If you are like most of the people in the chat, just wait until a couple of weeks from now when we review the book for you. Either way, We will talk to you in a couple of weeks.